Hey everyone, tonight we're going back. We have got a morning inside a 1950s bathroom where the medicine cabinet is open, and every shelf is telling a story nobody remembers anymore. We have got the real history of the American drugstore, the men who built it, the women who kept it stocked, and the remarkable machine of post-war medicine that turned a little mirrored box on the wall into something that meant safety and comfort and order, even when none of those things were entirely guaranteed. We have got an afternoon behind the counter at a Rexall, where the perfume meets the liniment, and the customers want something for everything, and the answers are almost always yes. And we have got a quieter conversation about what was actually inside those little bottles and tubes and tins, and what the gleaming, confident packaging was never going to volunteer. So before you get settled, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy spending time here, and leave me a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is wherever you are. I love seeing that. Now get comfortable, maybe pull a blanket up, and let us go back together. You wake up in a house that smells like itself. That is the first thing you notice before the light comes fully in through the curtains and before the sounds of the morning have sorted themselves out into anything recognisable. The house has a smell that belongs to it alone, a layering of things that have been here long enough to become invisible to everyone who lives here and immediately present to everyone who visits. There is the faint undertone of last night's supper that the kitchen is still holding, something with onions, something cooked in oil, something that required the oven and a good part of the afternoon. There is the smell of the hallway carpet, which is clean but old, and which has absorbed so many winters and so many pairs of shoes and so many Tuesday mornings that it has developed its own particular character, and underneath all of it, threading through the walls and the woodwork like something that has nowhere else to be, there is the smell of the medicine cabinet. You have not opened it yet. You're still in bed, but you know it is there. It is 1953 or thereabouts. The house is a Cape Cod on a street of Cape Cods, each one slightly different in colour and slightly similar in everything else, and the bathroom is small and white-tiled and has a window that faces east, so that by 7 in the morning the light comes in at a low, specific angle and makes everything look slightly more official than it did in the dark. The mirror above the sink is slightly foggy at the top left corner, where the backing has begun to lift, and the medicine cabinet is recessed into the wall behind it, a standard rectangular unit with a chrome frame and a door that opens with a small, satisfying click. The hinges are tight. The shelves are glass. The contents are organised in the way that only a household with a particular kind of woman at its centre can be organised, which is to say, they look casual, and nothing about their arrangement is casual at all. You get up before the rest of the house. This is not a choice you have made this morning so much as a posture you have settled into over years, a relationship with the early hour that has become as much a part of you as your name. The floor is cold under your feet, a chill that runs up through your legs and reminds you that late October does not care what the calendar says about it still being autumn. The hallway is dim. The children's doors are closed. Your husband's breathing, slow and regular and deeply, thoroughly asleep, follows you to the bathroom door and then stops when you close it behind you. You pull the light cord. The overhead fixture is a frosted glass globe, and it floods the small room with light that is functional rather than flattering, the kind of light that does not soften anything, that shows the tile grout for exactly what it is and shows your face for exactly what it is, and you have made a certain peace with that over time. The peace is not total, but it is the peace that is available, and it will do. You run the water and wait for it to warm. This takes longer than it should because the water heater is in the basement and the bathroom is on the second floor, and the house was not built with any particular attention to efficiency. It was built with attention to cost, and those are not the same thing. While you wait, you look at yourself in the mirror and make a series of small assessments that are automatic and nearly instantaneous, the way a pilot checks instruments. Not because anything is expected to be wrong, but because checking is the habit that keeps things from going wrong. Your face is creased from the pillow on one side. Your eyes are the eyes of a person who slept but not deeply. Your hair is the hair of a person who set it last night in pin curls and slept on them, which means it is flattened on one side and doing something unpredictable on the other, and will require, as it always does, a certain amount of attention before it becomes what it is supposed to be. The water is warm now. You splash your face, one handful at a time, and then you reach for the medicine cabinet and open it with the familiar small click of the latch, and the morning begins in earnest. There is a logic to this cabinet that you did not invent but that you have refined. The top shelf is for the things that are used daily, or nearly daily, the things that belong to the morning and the evening in the way that the newspaper belongs to the morning and the radio belongs to the evening. The middle shelf is for the things that are used frequently but not every day, the things that come down when someone is coming down with something, or when something has been knocked or scraped or strained. The bottom shelf is for the things that are used rarely, but must be immediately available, the things you reach for in the specific focused minutes when something has gone wrong enough to require them. You know where everything is without looking. You could find any of it in the dark, and you have more than once at 3 in the morning when a child is coughing or a child is feverish, or a child is crying in the particular way that means something is hurting, not simply the general pain of being small in a large world. The first thing you take down is the cold cream. It is a squat glass jar with a white lid, and the label says Pond's in the clean, reassuring typography that Pond's has always used. The typography of a company that has decided confidence is more persuasive than excitement, and has been right about this for longer than you have been alive. The cream inside is white and dense, with a faintly waxy surface, and a smell that you have worn every night since you were 17, and learned it from your mother, who learned it from her mother. And this is the thing about cold cream that none of the advertisements need to mention, because it is already built in. It is not just a product. It is a continuity. It connects the woman you are now to the girl you were and to the woman who taught you to be careful with your face. Because a woman's face is, among other things, a record, and the record is worth tending. You apply it in the circular motions you have applied it in every night and now every morning, working it into the skin at the outer corners of your eyes, along the jaw, down the sides of the nose, the places where the night accumulates. Cold cream, despite its name, is not cold by the time it reaches your face, because it has been sitting in a 70-degree bathroom and it has taken on the temperature of the room. What it is smooth, and what it does is loosen, and what it leaves behind when you wipe it away with a soft cloth is a face that is not younger, but is readier, prepared for what goes on top of it the way a wall is prepared before it is painted. You have thought of it in exactly those terms since your mother explained it to you, which perhaps says something about your mother and perhaps says something about you, and perhaps says something about the decade you were raised in which preparation and presentation were not considered vanity but management. You wipe the cloth across your face in smooth, deliberate strokes, top to bottom, and the cloth comes away with a faint pale film of a night's worth of skin and cream and whatever the air leaves on a face that sleeps near an open window, which is not much but is not nothing. You fold the cloth and hang it on the towel bar and look at yourself again. Better. Not finished, but better. The face is clean and slightly pink from the water and the cream, and the pin curls are beginning to loosen at the temples where they have been slept on, and there is work still to do, but the morning has a direction now, which is more than it had 10 minutes ago. Next you reach for the Jergens lotion, a flat-sided bottle of pale pink glass with a pump top that requires slightly more force than it ought to, and then delivers slightly more lotion than you wanted, which is a design flaw you have adapted to so thoroughly that you no longer notice it is a flaw. Jergens has been on this shelf since you set up the household, before that in the bathroom of your childhood home, and before that in the pharmacies of a country that had decided somewhere around 1930 that dry hands were a problem requiring a solution, and that the solution could be bottled and labelled and sold at the cosmetics counter between the face powder and the toothpaste. The lotion smells of cherries, faintly, not the real smell of cherries, but the distilled, formalised version of cherry that the perfumers arrived at somewhere in a laboratory, and which has colonised the word cherry in your memory so thoroughly that when you smell a real cherry you think briefly of Jergens before you think of fruit. You rub the lotion between your palms and then up the backs of your hands into the knuckles that have been cracking since the heat came on in the house and dried the air, and the lotion does what it says it will do, which is to say it makes things better in a modest, specific, temporary way. This is what most things on the shelf do. They make things better in a modest, specific, temporary way. The expectation that they should do more than this has never quite settled into you, which is perhaps why you continue to find the medicine cabinet satisfying. Behind the Jergens, pushed slightly to the back, is a tin of cloverine salve, which you have had for 6 years and which has approximately a third of its original contents remaining, a ratio that tells you something about how often things are seriously chapped or cracked or abraded in this household, but not about the precise occasions which you have long since stopped cataloguing. Cloverine is useful. This is the best thing that can be said about Cloverine. It is not glamorous, it does not smell pleasant, it does not come in packaging that invites second looks, but it does what it promises in a thorough and slightly stubborn way, which is to say, it seals things, protects things, softens things that have gone hard. You put it on chapped lips in January. You put it on the dry patches that appear on your elbows in November. You put it on the rough place at the corner of your right thumbnail that cracks every winter without fail. The same crack, the same location, as reliable and unwelcome as the first frost. Cloverine does not advertise heavily. It does not need to. The people who know about Cloverine will find it, and they will keep it, and it will be on their shelves for years, like a quiet relative who is not exciting company, but who shows up when it matters. Now you turn your attention to the middle shelf, not because you need it this morning, but because the middle shelf requires a kind of checking. In the way that a garden requires a kind of checking. Not that anything is expected to be wrong, but that the act of checking is itself part of how you keep things right. There is the mercurochrome, a small flat bottle of deep orange-red liquid that was the first thing applied to any cut, scrape or wound in this household from the moment you moved in and will, you assume, continue to be the first thing applied to any cut, scrape or wound until the bottle is empty or the children leave home, whichever comes first. Mercurochrome is the colour of confidence. This is the thing about it that no one says and everyone knows. The orange-red leaves a visible mark on the skin, a stain that says this was treated, this has been attended to, and for a child who has scraped a knee on the driveway and come in crying and required the specific ritual of sitting on the bathroom counter while the damage is assessed and addressed, the visible orange-red mark is not a side effect. It is the point. It is the evidence. It is the small physical record of being cared for, and it lasts for days, and during those days the child looks at it and remembers, with some obscure satisfaction, that the world took notice. You keep the mercurochrome next to the iodine, which is darker and more serious and stings in a way that the mercurochrome does not, and which you reserve for occasions that seem to require a stronger statement. Iodine has been used to disinfect wounds since the middle of the last century, and carries the authority of its long history in the way that only old remedies do. A quiet insistence that it has seen things, that it knows things, that it has been tested in circumstances more severe than a scraped knee on a Tuesday afternoon. Your own mother kept iodine, and kept mercurochrome, and used them according to a personal system she never fully articulated, but which her children absorbed entirely, as children absorb most things, through observation and repetition, and the slow accumulation of household logic. Next to the iodine is the aspirin, a round tin of Bayer that is replaced regularly, more regularly than most things on this shelf, because aspirin is the workhorse of the medicine cabinet, the thing that is reached for more often than anything else, for headaches that arrive with the afternoon, for the low fever that a child brings home from school in October, for the particular ache behind the eyes that appears on certain Sundays and means nothing is wrong exactly, but everything is somewhat off. Aspirin in 1953 is not yet complicated. It is not yet the subject of warnings or debates, or the small print considerations that will accumulate around it in later decades. It is simply a white tablet and a round tin, and a name that has become so general it has almost stopped being a brand, almost become the thing itself rather than one company's version of the thing, and you take two with a glass of water whenever a headache arrives and they work, usually within the hour, and this seems sufficient. There is also a small blue tin of Vicks Vapo Rub, which sits at the front of the middle shelf where it can be found without searching, because the occasions when Vapor Rub is needed are not usually occasions for searching. You know the smell of this tin the way you know the smell of the house, not because you have analysed it, but because it has been present for so long that your nervous system has catalogued it as belonging, as part of the furniture of your life. It is the smell of winter. It is the smell of a child with a cough, sitting up against pillows while you apply the rub to their chest and their back in slow warming circles, your hands moving in the same pattern, your mother's hands moved on your chest, the pattern that is not a medical protocol but a domestic inheritance, passed along the female line of families without a document, without a name, just the knowledge of where to press and how hard and in what direction, and the smell of camphor and eucalyptus and menthol rising in the steam of a small room where the heat is turned up and the window is cracked just enough to let in a line of cold air. Vaporub fixes nothing. It eases things. There is a difference, and the medicine cabinet on its best days is very clear about that difference. Behind the Vicks, there is a bottle of Phillips milk of magnesia, pale blue glass that is cool and slightly heavy in the hand, the label written in a font that is medicinal without being threatening, official without being cold. Milk of magnesia is for the occasions when the digestive system requires a conversation, and that conversation needs to be brief and conclusive. It has a taste that is slightly chalky and slightly sweet and entirely particular, a taste that belongs to no other thing, and that reappears in memory years later, at odd moments, as a complete sensory record of having been 8 years old and unwell on a Wednesday, and lying on the couch under an old blanket while the television made its noise in the corner. The dosage is measured out in a tablespoon, a real tablespoon from the kitchen drawer, slightly tarnished at the bowl, and the swallowing is accomplished with the resigned efficiency of someone who has made a decision and is seeing it through. The bottom shelf, the rarely touched shelf, the shelf that is for the serious and the unexpected, holds a different category of thing. There is a roll of gauze and a roll of adhesive tape, wound tight and secured with a rubber band, sitting next to a pair of blunt-nosed scissors that are designated for the bathroom and kept there absolutely, not borrowed for the kitchen, not moved to the sewing room, existing here and only here, because the moment you need them, you will need them specifically, and you cannot be searching the house for scissors while someone is bleeding. There is a small packet of butterfly bandages, which are for the cuts that are deeper than a bandage can cover, but shallower than the emergency room needs to be involved, cuts that require pulling together and holding, the domestic equivalent of surgery, accomplished at the bathroom sink with a certain calm efficiency, and then covered and watched for a day or two before the concern is set aside. Next to the gauze is a brown glass bottle of hydrogen peroxide, the standard 3% solution that has been the household's secondary disinfectant since hydrogen peroxide became widely available and affordable, which it has been for long enough now that you cannot imagine the shelf without it. Hydrogen peroxide is satisfying in a way that most medical things are not, because it makes a visible demonstration of its work. It fizzes, it bubbles against broken skin in a way that looks like action, that looks like chemistry, that looks like something being accomplished, and the fizzing is both the evidence of the process and, for children especially, a kind of performance that makes the wound feel attended to in a thorough and almost theatrical way. You have explained more than once that the bubbling is not the peroxide fighting the infection, but rather the peroxide reacting with an enzyme in the blood, which is a distinction your children find interesting for about 4 seconds before they return to watching the fizzing with the concentrated attention they usually reserve for television. There is also, on the bottom shelf in the back right corner where it has lived undisturbed for 2 years, a small bottle of paregoric, a dark amber liquid that is a tincture of opium and has been used for stomach cramps and diarrhea and the restlessness of teething children since long before anyone who lives in this house was born. The bottle was given to you by your mother when your first child was an infant, passed along the way that certain household things are passed, without ceremony, without much explanation, as an obvious necessity. You have used it rarely, because the occasions that require it are specific, and you have always tried to assess those occasions honestly, rather than reaching for the bottle at the first sign of discomfort. But it is there. It is available. Its presence on the shelf represents a certain category of maternal preparation, the acknowledgement that some nights will be hard and that the hard nights have been anticipated and that there are resources for them. You do not think about what is in it with any particular concern. It is what the doctor would recommend. It is what your mother used. It has been on the shelves of American households for decades and decades, unremarkably, as accepted a part of the domestic inventory as the aspirin and the gauze. You close the cabinet with the small click of its latch and turn to the sink. The light through the east window has shifted in the time you have been standing here, moved from low and angled to something more direct, and the sounds of the house have changed as well. The thin creak of a child turning in a bed, the starting cough of the furnace finding its way to the registers, the distant sound of a neighbour's car door that means the morning has already begun for someone else on the street and is committed to beginning for you. You pick up the toothbrush and find the apana, a white tube with a red and blue label, and the familiar smell of the paste opens on the air, the smell of peppermint and something faintly medicinal underneath, the smell of doing what is necessary in the morning. The tube is squeezed from the bottom, because this is the rule that exists in this bathroom and only this bathroom, and that you enforce with a patient consistency, of someone who has decided that the small things are the small things worth getting right. You brush your teeth for the 2 minutes that the dentist recommends and that most mornings require a certain amount of internal negotiation to achieve. Epana has been the toothpaste of this household since before there was a household, since the early years of your marriage when you bought your first chew from the Five and Dime on a Saturday afternoon and considered it, briefly, a decision, and then decided that it was not a decision at all, but simply what was available and what was affordable and what you had grown up with and what therefore required no further consideration. You have never tried Colgate. You have considered trying Colgate in the abstract way that you sometimes consider the other rows at the grocery store, but there is nothing specific that draws you there. No dissatisfaction, no particular curiosity, just the general awareness that other things exist, which is not the same as wanting them. You rinse and spit and run the cold water over the brush, tapping it twice on the rim of the sink, which is the tap that means done, and which means nothing to anyone but you, and yet feels necessary. You set the brush in its holder and turn off the water and stand for a moment in the white morning light with the small sounds of the house gathering around you. And there is a particular quality to this minute, this specific minute, after the morning routine and before the day has become what the day is going to be, a minute in which you are finished with one thing and not yet started on the next, and the morning is still relatively unviolated, and the cabinet is closed, and everything that was supposed to be there is there, and the day is a problem but a familiar one. You pull the light cord and the frosted globe goes dark and the east light takes over entirely, and you open the bathroom door and hear the first real sound of the morning, a child's voice from behind a closed door, not the voice of emergency or distress, but the drowsy rising voice of someone deciding to be awake, and you stand in the hallway for one moment more, holding the particular piece of a morning that is still yours, and then you go downstairs to start the coffee, and the morning takes you with it, which is what mornings do, which is what they have always done, which is what you would not change, even if you could, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days, when the medicine cabinet has been opened not as ritual but as necessity, and you have stood in the white light of the bathroom mirror and done what needed doing, and the children have been tended, and the house is held. The small rooms fill with the smell of coffee and the furnace heat comes up through the registers, and the particular day of this particular autumn settles over the street in the ordinary way that only ordinary days know how to do, and the medicine cabinet waits on the wall of the second-floor bathroom with its chrome frame and its glass shelves and its careful inventory, ready, as always, to be what it is needed to be. You will open it again tonight. You will perform the evening version of the morning ritual, the cold cream in reverse, the final tidying of the day's small damages. The children will come in for their bedtime toothbrushing, with the apana and their baths with the ivory, and there will likely be one consultation of the middle shelf before the lights go out, a scrape or a headache or the beginning of something that is not yet definite but has the texture of something coming, and you will address it with the same efficiency and the same quiet competence that you brought to the morning. Because this is the thing about the medicine cabinet that the advertisements always almost get right, but never quite. It is not about the products, it is about the posture of someone who has decided that the small emergencies will be met with preparation, that the daily maintenance of the human body is a task worth doing well, that the shelves will be stocked and the caps will be tight and nothing will be empty when it is needed. The medicine cabinet behind its mirrored door holds the evidence of that decision. Every bottle and tin and tube is a small promise kept, a small piece of the life that has been considered and prepared for, a small refusal to be caught without what is needed. This is what the women who stocked these cabinets were doing. They were practicing a form of care so ordinary it was invisible, so domestic it required no acknowledgement, so essential that the households it held together could not have been what they were without it. The mirrored door swings shut. The latch clicks. The morning goes on. There is a corner of the middle shelf that belongs to the children specifically, or rather to the management of children who are unwell, and it has a particular logic distinct from the adult logic of the rest of the cabinet. The children's aspirin is there, orange-flavoured, in a small bottle with a safety-resistant cap that is not yet the child-proofing of the next decade, but is a step in that direction, a recognition that the things on these shelves are not toys and should not be accessible in the way that toys are. The orange flavour of the children's aspirin was an innovation that seems small and is not, because any parent who has tried to administer a bitter adult tablet to a sick and resistant 4-year-old understands immediately why flavor matters, why the medicine that is accepted is the medicine that helps, and the medicine that is refused is the medicine that does not, regardless of what it contains. Your own children take the orange aspirin without great drama when it is offered, which you have come to consider one of the small, specific reliabilities of the household. Next to the children's aspirin is the ear syringe, a small bulb of hard rubber that is used for cleaning ear canals and for the more urgent purpose of irrigating ears that have accumulated wax or debris, which in children of a certain age is a regular domestic occurrence. You have used the ear syringe on both children, with varying degrees of cooperation on their part and with the particular patience the procedure requires, which is more patience than the procedure seems to warrant until you have done it once without enough patience and understand exactly why the patience is necessary. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. The ear syringe is not glamorous, it does not appear in advertisements, but it is used, and it is useful, and its presence on the shelf is the presence of practical knowledge converted into a small rubber object. There is a thermometer as well, glass and mercury, thin and cool in the hand, kept in a small cylindrical case of metal that has a paper label gone slightly soft at its edges. Taking a temperature is a ritual in its own right, a moment of assessment that carries a weight disproportionate to the 3 minutes required to perform it. Because the thermometer does not just measure temperature, it makes a decision. Below 100 degrees, and the day proceeds normally, more or less. Above 101, and the calculus changes. The school call, the decision about whether to go to work, the question of the doctor. The thermometer, when its silver line stops climbing, delivers a verdict with the authority of an instrument, not a feeling. And there is something both reassuring and faintly alarming about this authority, because feelings can be dismissed as worry, but numbers cannot. And the 3 minutes you wait while the glass tube sits under a child's tongue are 3 minutes of a particular quality of attention, watchful and quiet and slightly suspended. You shake the thermometer down to below 96 every time you use it, in the brisk wrist motion you learned from your mother, and which is the correct technique for mercury thermometers, a motion that must be brisk enough to work and controlled enough not to send the glass instrument against the edge of the sink. You have never broken a thermometer. This is a small record of which you are quietly proud, and about which you have never spoken, because the things you are quietly proud of in this household are rarely the things anyone would expect. And this is one of the things about domestic life that the official image does not capture. The private calibration of competence that nobody witnesses and nobody acknowledges, and that you nonetheless maintain, not for recognition, but because maintaining it is part of what makes the household what it is. The witch hazel is on the top shelf as well, a large bottle of amber-coloured liquid with a plain label, Dickinson's, though in some months it is the generic drugstore brand, and you have stopped noticing the difference because the product is the same. Witch hazel distilled from the Hamamelis virginiana shrub has been a feature of American medicine cabinets and bathroom shelves since the 19th century, when the distilled extract was promoted by the Pond's Extract Company, the same company that would later become known for cold cream, and sold as a treatment for bruises, insect bites, hemorrhoids, varicose veins, and a general category of minor inflammation that the era categorized with the word sprains, but which covered a wider territory. In the 1950s household, witch hazel is the toner, used after washing to close pores and remove the traces of the Pond's cold cream that the soft cloth missed, and it is the spot treatment for the pimple that occasionally announces itself on a face that is otherwise managed, and it is the compress for the headache that comes with sinus pressure in October, a cloth soaked in witch hazel and applied to the forehead while you lie back for 15 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon, which is not rest exactly, but is the nearest available approximation. Behind the witch hazel is the alum, a small lump of potassium aluminum sulfate in a small glass jar, used as an aftershave astringent and also for the more delicate problem of a nick from the safety razor, which is the razor your husband uses at this counter that is partly yours and partly his, the morning and evening divided between your rituals and his with the unconscious efficiency of a shared space. The alum stings, briefly, precisely, in the way of a thing that is working. There is something honest about a sting that is proportional to its cause, that says here and no further and then stops. The alum stop, the small block dabbed against the cut, is among the most specific and most ordinary sensations in the medicine cabinet's catalogue of sensations, and it belongs to the shared morning, The brief overlap of routines that happens between the time the coffee is made and the time the children need attention. The minutes when the bathroom is occupied by both of you, negotiating the counter and the mirror in the particular way of two people who have been doing this long enough to have arranged themselves without discussing it. The safety razor itself lives at the edge of the shelf, not quite in the cabinet but not quite outside it, a trespass that you have decided not to address because the counter has been arranged to accommodate it, and because some decisions about shared space are maintained by virtue of never being named. The razor is a Gillette, double-edged, with the brand's characteristic authority of design, the solidity of something that was made to last and knows it. The blades are in a small flat packet nearby, the shaving cream in a tube rather than a brush and mug, which is the modern way, and which your husband adopted when the tube became available without any persuasion required, because the tube is more efficient and efficiency is a value that does not require convincing, sits beside the razor with the companionable proximity of things that belong together. You have no particular investment in the shaving cream. It is your husband's domain, and you manage it only in the practical sense of noticing when the tube is nearly flat and adding it to the list. But you notice it the way you notice everything in this cabinet, with the peripheral, continuous attention of someone who is responsible for the inventory. There is a small bottle of bay rum behind the shaving things, amber like the witch hazel, but with a distinctive smell that is the smell of your husband in the morning. The smell that is the olfactory equivalent of the sound of his specific footstep, the identification of a person through one of their materials. Bay rum is an aftershave that has been in American bathrooms and barbershops since the middle of the previous century, a product made from the leaves of the bay tree distilled in rum, imported from the Caribbean, and applied with a slap of the palm to the freshly shaved face, with the confidence of a gesture that is also, in its small way, a pleasure. The smell fills the bathroom briefly each morning, mixing with the coffee that has made its way up from the kitchen through the heating vents, and then fades as the morning organises itself into its work, and by the time the day is fully underway it has become part of the general smell of the house, indistinguishable from the rest of it, filed away in the household's sensory memory until tomorrow morning, when it will reappear, briefly and specifically, and be recognised. The basin is white porcelain, slightly yellowed at the drain, and the soap dish beside it holds a bar of ivory, which is what this household has always used and what you expect will always use, not out of brand loyalty exactly, but out of the particular inertia of a product that works, and that you therefore have no occasion to replace with something else. Ivory is 99 and 44/100% pure, which is a claim that Procter & Gamble introduced in 1879 and has never stopped making, a claim that is specific enough to sound scientific, and that became, over decades of repetition, one of the most recognised and trusted phrases in American advertising history, not because every consumer analysed its meaning, but because the specificity of the fraction gave the claim the quality of evidence, and evidence, even when its nature is not fully understood, is persuasive. The bar in the soap dish is slightly translucent at its corners, worked to its last quarter by the morning's use, and you will put a new bar from the linen closet in its place this evening, because the linen closet holds 6 bars of ivory at all times, bought during the Rexall 1-cent sale in September, and stacked on the second shelf beside the extra rolls of toilet tissue and the spare package of bandages and the additional tube of Vipana that is the backup to the backup, because running out is not a category of event that the household acknowledges as possible. Beneath the sink, in the small cabinet that is technically part of the bathroom storage but that you consider functionally adjacent to the medicine cabinet, there are the things that are too large for the shelves or too seldom used to warrant prime shelf position. The heating pad is there, a flat square of cloth-covered electrical cord that is plugged in when the backache arrives, which it does in February, reliably, in the specific lower left quadrant that has been protesting February since you were 31. The hot water bottle is there as well, older than the heating pad, the rubber slightly tacky to the touch with age, used for the kind of heat that is more personal than the pad's flat broadcast. The bottle filled at the tap and stoppered and pressed to a stomach that is cramping or a foot that is cold, the oldest technology of comfort available in the bathroom cabinet's total inventory, older than the aspirin and older than the mercurochrome and older than the Ponds, just water made warm and given a shape that the body can hold against itself. The baby oil is there, Johnson & Johnson, light and clean smelling, used not for a baby currently, but kept because baby oil is the oil of this household, for reasons that extend beyond babies, used for the dry elbows in December, and for the squeaking hinge on the bathroom door, and for the removal of the stubborn medical adhesive that the bandages leave behind on tender skin. Baby oil and baby powder occupy a domestic position somewhat outside their official category, applied freely across the household's range of needs because they are mild and they work and they are always in stock. The Johnson & Johnson brand had been on American nursery shelves since the 1890s, when Robert Wood Johnson II, reading a doctor's paper about the danger of infections from surgical dressings, decided that what the household needed was a medicated plaster that did not require pharmacy preparation. And the company that grew from that decision built its reputation on a specific kind of trust. The trust that a product intended for the most vulnerable member of the household was safe, and that safety, once established, extended to everyone else. There is also in the undersink cabinet a small box of Kotex, which is kept here rather than in the medicine cabinet because the medicine cabinet is the shared space, and the undersink cabinet is the private space, which is a distinction that exists in most households of this era, and that is observed with the same automatic consistency as the distinction between what is discussed at the dinner table and what is discussed nowhere in the household, which is to say that the distinction is real and operational and rarely requires articulation. Kotex introduced disposable menstrual pads in 1920, and in doing so changed something fundamental about domestic life for women, replaced a labour-intensive cloth system with a disposable alternative that required less of the laundry work that had always fallen, without comment to the women who did the washing. The product appeared without much ceremony in the undersink cabinet of most American households, and stayed there with the same unceremonious permanence, never advertised in the direct terms of its use, always referred to obliquely in the language the advertising industry had developed for the purpose, a language of freshness and confidence and the blue liquid that represented what no advertisement was permitted to name, but which every woman who saw the advertisement understood with complete clarity. You stand in the bathroom one more moment, the morning having organised itself into a shape you recognise, the children beginning to make their way toward wakefulness on the other side of the hallway wall, the furnace heat adequate in the bathroom now, the east light enough by which to see yourself clearly in the mirror, which is not a thing you require every morning, but which the morning offers anyway. This specific quality of light at this specific hour, honest and ordinary and neither flattering nor unkind, you look like yourself. You look like the woman who was up before the sun had committed to rising, and who has made coffee and who has tended the cabinet, and who will now go downstairs and begin the visible work of the morning, the feeding and the getting ready and the leaving and the staying, the architecture of the day that requires building from the ground every morning regardless of what the previous day's building cost. The medicine cabinet was stocked. The morning was prepared for. Everything was in its place. This is what it looked like, from the inside, on the ordinary days and the harder ones. A woman in a white-tiled bathroom with the east light coming in, doing the work that no one counted because no one had agreed that it was the kind of work that needed counting, tending the inventory of the household's health with the same seriousness and competence that any professional brings to their materials, except without the title or the wage or the recognition, and with the knowledge that the professionalism would be noted only in its absence, only when something ran out or was not ready, or failed to appear when needed, which in this household did not happen, because the cabinet was stocked, and the cabinet was stocked because someone had made sure it was, and someone had made sure it was because that was what was required, and what was required was done, daily, without ceremony or complaint, in the particular ordinary heroism of a domestic competence so complete it had become invisible. To understand how the medicine cabinet became the particular object it was in 1953, the small chrome-framed box on the bathroom wall, with its organised shelves and its inventory of confidence, you have to go back to a period before bathrooms were even common, before the products inside had names, before the word hygiene had the specific domestic weight it would eventually carry. You have to go back to a time when the idea of a dedicated space for health and grooming was not a given but a goal, and the people who understood that goal earliest were not the families who would eventually benefit from it, but the entrepreneurs and pharmacists and advertising men who saw, with considerable clarity, that a country learning to trust medicine was also a country ready to be sold medicine, and that the territory between those two things was enormous, and that the first person to map it thoroughly would have a significant advantage. The American drugstore as it existed in its mid-20th century form was not a natural evolution. It was a designed object, created and shaped by specific decisions made by specific people at specific moments in time, and the arc of its creation runs from the patent medicine era of the late 19th century through the growth of pharmaceutical chains in the 1920s and 30s, through the post-war expansion that put a Rexall or a Walgreens or an independent pharmacy within walking distance of nearly every American household, and into the 1950s, when the drugstore had become not just a place to fill a prescription, but an entire institution of domestic life. To understand the medicine cabinet, you have to understand the drugstore that supplied it, and to understand the drugstore, you have to start, inevitably, with the medicine that came before. Patent medicines were the foundation of American pharmaceutical culture, and they were, in a way that is difficult to fully appreciate from the present distance, everywhere. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were saturated with them. They came in bottles and tins and packets, with names that promised more than could be delivered, and labels that described symptoms and solutions with a confidence that was proportional to their manufacturer's ambition and inversely proportional to their scientific basis. Dr. Pierce's golden medical discovery, Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound, Hamlin's wizard oil, Hood's sarsaparilla, swamp root. They were sold in general stores and by travelling salesmen and from the back of wagons and later from the shelves of the emerging drugstores, and they treated, according to their labels, everything from dyspepsia to female complaints to the general category of ailment called nervous exhaustion, which was not a diagnosis so much as a permission slip for a wide range of human suffering that the medical establishment had not yet gotten around to naming more precisely. Most patent medicines contained significant quantities of alcohol. Many contained opiates, cocaine, and other substances that are now controlled or banned, not because their manufacturers were malicious exactly, but because the regulatory framework that would eventually distinguish between medicine and poison had not yet been constructed. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, and then the more comprehensive Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act of 1938, began the long work of that construction, requiring that certain substances be listed on labels, that certain claims be substantiated, that certain products be brought under medical oversight. The transition was long and contested and imperfect, but it had a direction, and the direction was toward the kind of medicine cabinet that the 1950s household would eventually recognize. Charles Walgreen was born in 1873 in Illinois, and before he became the founder of the drugstore chain that would bear his name, he spent years as a pharmacist's assistant, learning the trade from the inside in the way that trades were learned then, through proximity and observation and the accumulation of practical knowledge. He opened his first drugstore in Chicago in 1901, on the corner of Bowen and Cottage Grove, in a neighborhood where the customers were working people with specific needs and limited resources, and a reasonable skepticism about products that could not demonstrate their worth. Walgreen's innovation was not primarily pharmaceutical, it was commercial. He understood something about the drugstore that its traditional form had not fully recognized, which was that a store where people came to fill prescriptions was also a store where people came to manage their daily lives, and that managing daily lives required more than prescriptions. It required aspirin and cold cream and adhesive bandages and tooth powder and soap, and a dozen other things that were beginning to have brand names and labelled packaging, and a kind of organised presence that invited the customer not just to buy what they came for, but to find what they had not known they needed. Walgreen began adding soda fountains to his stores in the 1910s and 20s, a decision that is sometimes described as a gimmick, but was actually a profound understanding of how Americans used public space. The soda fountain turned the drugstore from a medical errand into a destination, a place where you came not just out of necessity but out of choice, where you might stay for half an hour and have a chocolate soda and talk to the woman on the next stool and notice, on your way out, that the shelf near the door had a new cold cream or a bottle of the hand lotion that the woman down the street had mentioned last week. Foot traffic was the mechanism. The soda fountain brought the foot traffic in, and the shelves converted it into purchases, and the purchases built the habit of the drugstore as the place where household needs were met, in the way that the general store had been for an earlier generation. By the 1930s, Walgreens had dozens of stores. By the 1940s, it had hundreds. The model was refined with each iteration, the soda fountain becoming more elaborate, the cosmetics counter growing into one of the central features of the store layout, the prescription counter pushed to the back, not because it was less important, but because getting the customer to walk through the rest of the store to reach it meant that every trip for a prescription was also a trip past the aspirin and the Vicks and the Jergens and the Cloverine and the lipsticks and the film for the camera and the birthday cards and the stationery. This was not accidental. It was architecture in the service of commerce, and it was so effective that the layout became standard, was adopted by competitors and imitators throughout the country, became so familiar that a mid-century American walking into any drugstore knew immediately where to go and what to expect, which is the highest achievement of a retail environment. The Rexall Drug Company operated on a different model. Rather than owning its stores outright, Rexall built a franchise system that allowed independent pharmacists across the country to buy into the brand, carrying Rexall-labelled products alongside their regular inventory and benefiting from the advertising and supply chain that the national brand provided. At its peak, there were more than 10,000 Rexall drugstores in the United States, which meant that in most American towns the Rexall was simply what the drugstore was, not a chain in the way the word is understood now, but a presence, ubiquitous and familiar, the place where you went for your prescription, and your Bismarex and your Digel and your Rexall aspirin, which was the same aspirin you could have bought under another name, but which came in a Rexall bottle and therefore carried the implicit endorsement of a system you trusted. Rexall's 1-cent sales were a promotional mechanism that became a genuine cultural event in many communities through the 1930s, 40s and 50s. The premise was simple and irresistible. Buy one item at the regular price, get a second item for 1 cent. The sales happened twice a year, and in the weeks before them, families stockpiled their list of needed items, planned what they would buy and what they would wait to buy, and then arrived at the Rexall on the first day of the sale, in the way that later generations would arrive at department stores on Black Friday, with a list and a budget and a certain cheerful competitiveness. The medicine cabinet that was stocked during a Rexall 1-cent sale was a medicine cabinet that reflected the structure of post-war American consumer culture almost perfectly. Deliberate, planned, organised around brand names and regular purchases, managed by a woman who had thought about it, who had made decisions about it, who had matched her family's needs against her available resources and arrived at a result she could look at with satisfaction. It would be a mistake to describe the post-war American pharmaceutical expansion purely as a commercial phenomenon, though. The decades following World War II brought genuine advances in medicine that changed what the medicine cabinet contained and what it was expected to do. Penicillin, synthesized in sufficient quantities to be commercially available for the first time during the war, moved into civilian prescription use in the late 1940s, and with it came the beginning of the antibiotic era, the understanding that certain categories of infection that had been dangerous or fatal could now be addressed with a pill, a development that altered the experience of illness in American households in a way that is difficult to overstate. The medicine cabinet of 1945 was not the medicine cabinet of 1955, and the difference was not only cosmetic. The sulfur drugs came first, then the penicillins, then the growing range of antibiotics that required a doctor's prescription and a pharmacist's dispensing, and produced in the process a new kind of medical authority, a new relationship between household and doctor and drugstore that would define how Americans understood health for the rest of the century. The vitamins were a parallel development. The discovery and isolation of the major vitamins through the 1920s, 30s and 40s created an entirely new category of product for the drugstore shelf and the medicine cabinet, the supplement, the thing that was not treating a specific illness, but addressing a specific nutritional absence, or believed to be. By the early 1950s, the medicine cabinet that did not contain a bottle of vitamins was unusual. The most common was the standard multivitamin, usually labelled with a letter combination, vitamins A through D, or the full alphabet at the premium price, usually orange or yellow tablets that smelled vaguely of yeast, and came in bottles of 50 or 100, the size and shape of a small aspirin container, but carrying a different kind of promise. The promise not of recovery, but of prevention. The distinction was new, and it was significant. The medicine cabinet had always been about having something ready for when things went wrong. Now it was also about keeping things from going wrong, which is a different relationship with the future, a more optimistic one, and it fit the 1950s mood, the mood of a country that had survived a depression and a war, and arrived in a period of expansion, and wanted very much to believe that the future could be managed, that the right preparation would be rewarded, that a well-stocked cabinet and a daily vitamin and a regular visit to the dentist were not merely habits, but investments. Helena Rubinstein came to the United States from Poland in 1902, and by the time the 1950s had settled into their characteristic form, she was in her 70s, and her name was on beauty products around the world, and the products that carried her name were on the top shelves of bathroom cabinets in houses on streets like the one we have been standing on this morning. Rubenstein understood something about American women that American women themselves sometimes had trouble articulating, which was that the beauty routine was not vanity, was not a frivolous indulgence or a capitulation to male expectation, but a form of discipline and self-possession, a daily ritual of maintenance and attention that was as serious in its own terms as anything else a woman did. She said, at various points in her long career, that beauty was everything, and that ugly was no excuse, and while these statements carried the edge of a woman who had built an empire and had the authority to be provocative, they also reflected a genuine conviction that the attention women paid to their appearance was intelligent attention, not wasted effort. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. Rubenstein arrived in New York speaking limited English, and with a beauty business she had already built in Australia. A face cream she had brought from Europe and that she sold first to society women, and then, as her distribution expanded, to the wider market. What she understood that the patent medicine sellers before her had often missed was that the promise had to be credible. Not the advertising claim exactly, but the experience of the product. If the cream did not feel like it was doing something, if the lotion left the skin feeling exactly as it had before, if the application ritual was not itself pleasurable and specific, then no amount of advertising would bring the customer back. The product had to participate in a relationship with the woman who used it. It had to be something she could trust. And trust, Rubenstein understood, was built slowly, through repetition, through the consistent delivery of a specific experience over time, until the woman reached for the jar not just because she remembered to, but because the day did not feel properly started without it. This is the quality that the medicine cabinet encoded. Not luxury, not aspiration, not the pursuit of some transformed future self. Reliability. The consistent availability of specific things in specific places, the morning confirmation that the supplies were adequate, the evening application of products that had been applied every evening for years, the small rituals that added up to a coherent relationship between a woman and her face, her body, her household, the accumulated days of her life. The drugstore supplied the raw materials. The women organized them and replenished them, and made of them something the drugstore had not designed for. A daily practice of self-maintenance that was also, quietly, a practice of self-care, even in the years before that phrase existed in its current form. Charles Walgreen died in 1939 before the great post-war expansion of the chain he built. His stores continued without him, under the management of his son, Charles Walgreen Jr., who understood the institution his father had created and moved it carefully into the new era. The soda fountain began to decline in the late 1950s, as fast food arrived and changed the way Americans ate quickly and cheaply. But by then the drugstore had secured its position as something larger than any single feature, something structural in American life. The prescription counter at the back remained the anchor. The cosmetics and health products in the front continued to grow, and the medicine cabinet at home, stocked on Saturday afternoons after the children's appointments, or during the Rexall 1-cent sale or on the way back from the grocery store, continued to be what it had been for decades. The domestic expression of a society that had learned to trust certain products, certain institutions, certain promises, and had organized its daily life around the confidence that the shelves would be stocked and the labels could be believed, and the morning would proceed with the orderly application of the things that kept the family running. The drugstore that made all of this possible was not a neutral place. It was a space built by specific decisions, shaped by specific people, positioned in the culture with specific intentions. But the thing it became, in the hands of the women who used it week after week and filled their cabinets from its shelves and organized its contents by instinct and experience, and the handed-down knowledge of their mothers, was something more than its designers planned for. It was a system. A quiet, reliable, utterly ordinary system for managing the daily life of the human body, and it worked, imperfectly but genuinely, in the way that most good domestic systems work. Not through perfection, but through consistency. Not through transformation, but through maintenance. Not through the dramatic, but through the daily. The chrome of the medicine cabinet catches the morning light one more time, and the door swings open with the small satisfying click, and the shelves are full, and the day can begin. The products that filled the medicine cabinet did not arrive there by accident. They arrived through decades of competition, innovation, failure, and the specific chemistry of commercial culture that the 20th century developed for the manufacture of trust. To understand why Pond's was on that shelf and not some other cold cream, why Bayer was in the aspirin tin and not some other aspirin, why Johnson & Johnson had the baby powder and Vicks had the chest rub and Listerine had the mouth rinse, you have to follow the stories of the companies that built those brands, because the brands were not just products but relationships, and the relationships had histories. The Pond's Extract Company began in 1846, when Theron Pond, a pharmacist in Utica, New York, developed a healing salve from witch hazel that he claimed, with the extravagant confidence of the mid-19th century patent medicine era, could treat a wide range of conditions. He sold his extract door-to-door and through dry goods stores, and the business grew and the product evolved, and when the company eventually discontinued the original extract and pivoted toward cold cream and vanishing cream in the early 20th century, it brought with it the accumulated credibility of the Pond's name, the sense that this was a company that had been here long enough to be trusted. The cold cream campaign that Pond's launched in the 1920s is considered one of the most successful advertising campaigns in American history. It featured endorsements from society women, and later from royalty and celebrities, women whose names and faces appeared in the advertisements beside their testimony to the cream's effects, and the message was consistent and powerful. This is the cream of women who are enviable, and if you use it, you are participating in what they have. This is the advertising logic that Helena Rubinstein identified and refined, and that her rival, Elizabeth Arden, developed in her own direction. And the two women spent decades competing not just for shelf space, but for the more fundamental territory of women's belief about what beauty required and who could deliver it. Rubinstein was born Helena Charja Rubinstein in Krakow in 1872, the eldest of 8 daughters of a shopkeeper, and she emigrated first to relatives in Australia, where she began selling the face cream she had brought from Europe in a small jar, and then to London, and then to Paris, and finally to New York. And by the time she opened her first American salon in New York in 1915, she had already built a business on 2 continents. She was brilliant and she was difficult, and she was one of the most acute observers of women's psychology that the American beauty industry produced, which is saying something because the American beauty industry produced several very acute observers of women's psychology. Elizabeth Arden, born Florence Nightingale Graham in Ontario in 1884, renamed herself with the deliberate intention of constructing a brand identity before the concept of brand identity had been named. She opened her first salon on Fifth Avenue in 1910, 2 doors from where Rubinstein would later open hers, and the competition between them, which was personal and business and occasionally spectacular, shaped the American cosmetics industry for the first half of the 20th century. Arden's genius was the ritual. She understood, before most of her contemporaries, that the woman who bought the face cream was buying not just the cream but the procedure, the specific application method, the correct order of products, the transformation of a daily chore into a daily ceremony. Her 8-hour cream, developed in the 1930s and named for its supposed therapeutic persistence, was not just a product. It was an invitation to a specific kind of daily attention, a commitment of time and intention that the woman who accepted it was also implicitly accepting the value of attending to herself. The value of attending to herself is a concept that the 1950s handled with more complexity than the official image suggests. On one side of it was the advertising pressure, the constant reminder that the unattended face was the face of a woman who had let herself go, the implication that self-care was actually the care of others, the maintenance of the husband's satisfaction, and the children's pride and the neighbour's opinion. This framing was real and was limiting and did the damage that limited framings always do. On the other side of it, in the actual practice of the actual women who bought the actual cold cream and applied it in the actual bathroom in the actual morning, there was something else. Something the advertising was trading on without fully intending to offer. The 5 minutes in front of the mirror were 5 minutes that belonged to the woman alone, before the day made its claims, before the household required her attention, before any of the purposes she served in the world had been asked of her. The ritual was hers. The cream on her fingertips was hers. The reflection she was attending to was hers. The advertising said this was about staying attractive for your husband. The women doing it often understood, without needing to articulate it, that it was also about the morning mirror and the quiet private decision to take themselves seriously. Listerine has perhaps the most instructive advertising history of any product that ended up in the American medicine cabinet, because it is a history of a genuine product that was also the subject of one of the most effective manufactured anxieties in the history of American commerce. Listerine was developed by Dr. Joseph Lawrence in 1879 as a surgical antiseptic, named for Joseph Lister, the British surgeon who had pioneered antiseptic surgical technique. It worked as a surgical antiseptic. It was also effective as a mouthwash. Its manufacturer, the Lambert Pharmacal Company, licensed it to dentists and promoted it for oral hygiene through the early 20th century, with moderate success. Then in 1921, the advertising copywriter Milton Feasley invented the term halitosis to describe bad breath in a Listerine advertisement. The term derived from the Latin halitus for breath, and the effect on Listerine's sales was essentially instantaneous. In 6 years, the company went from annual revenues of approximately $115,000 to over $8 million. Not because bad breath was new, bad breath is as old as the species, but because Feasley and the Lambert Company had given the condition a clinical-sounding name, which made it a diagnosis, and a diagnosis implied a treatment, and Listerine was the treatment. The genius of the halitosis campaign was its social anxiety architecture. The advertisements showed scenes of professional and romantic failure, the woman who cannot keep her friends, the man who cannot secure the promotion, the young couple whose relationship has mysteriously cooled, all traced to the source that the subjects cannot see but the reader can, the invisible social catastrophe of unaddressed breath. The advertisements used the language of medical authority to describe a social embarrassment, and they sold a product as the solution to a problem they had largely invented, and they were extraordinarily effective, and the Listerine bottle appeared in American medicine cabinets with the urgent presence of a product that people now believe they could not manage without. This is not to say Listerine did not work. It did work as a mouthwash, as an antibacterial rinse, as a tool for oral hygiene that genuinely reduced certain bacterial populations in the mouth. But the urgency with which it was purchased, the anxiety it was purchased in response to, was manufactured. The anxiety was real. The social fear of being perceived as unclean, as unaware of one's own offensiveness, was a genuinely operative fear in a culture that placed considerable emphasis on respectability and social propriety, and the advertising was expert at finding the nerve and pressing on it. The Listerine bottle in the medicine cabinet was not just a product, it was the physical expression of a social anxiety that had been cultivated for commercial purposes, and the women and men who bought it were responding rationally to an irrational pressure. Alka-Seltzer arrived in 1931 during the depths of the Depression, which seems like an unlikely moment for a new product to establish itself, but which turned out to be exactly the right moment, because the Depression was also, for many Americans, a period of physical stress and nutritional inadequacy, and the particular biological consequences of sustained worry, all of which produced symptoms that Alka-Seltzer was positioned to address. The company that developed it, Miles Laboratories of Elkhart, Indiana, had observed that the staff of a newspaper in Elkhart seemed to be getting through the cold and flu season with unusual success, and upon investigation discovered that the editor was dosing his staff with a combination of aspirin and baking soda in water. Miles Laboratories refined this into a tablet that effervesced dramatically when dropped into a glass, because the effervescence was, as with the hydrogen peroxide, a performance of effectiveness that the product understood to be as important as its chemistry. Plop plop, fizz fizz. The advertising jingle would not arrive until 1976, but the principle behind it, the visible and audible demonstration of the product's activity, was built into the tablet from its invention. The stomach ailment medicine cabinet of the 1950s was a well-stocked subgallery of the larger collection. There was the milk of magnesia, pale blue and reliable, for the stomach that required persuasion to move forward. There was the Pepto-Bismol, pink and specific, for the stomach that had moved too far and too fast and needed calming. There was the dye gel for the gas that accompanied the heavy dinners of the decade, the casseroles and the pot roasts and the dishes that were built for staying power rather than lightness. There was the Alka-Seltzer for the morning after headache that was not discussed as the morning after headache but as simply a headache, because the 1950s had a particular domestic fiction about certain kinds of headaches and certain kinds of evenings that the medicine cabinet participated in by providing the remedy without requiring the diagnosis. The medicine cabinet in this, as in many things, was practical rather than judgmental. It held what was needed and it did not ask why. The Band-Aid by 1953 was so thoroughly the generic word for adhesive bandage that the actual brand name behind it, Johnson & Johnson, had begun to fade into the background of the product itself, which is the peculiar success of certain brand names, to become so synonymous with their category that the brand name itself becomes a common noun. Johnson & Johnson introduced the Band-Aid in 1920, the invention of Earl Dixon, a cotton buyer for the company whose wife frequently cut and burned herself in the kitchen, and who noticed that the surgical tape and gauze available for wound dressing were not easily applied one-handed to a small specific injury. Dixon's solution was to prepare ready-made strips of surgical tape with gauze attached, which his wife could apply to her own injuries without assistance, and the product he eventually brought to the company's attention became one of the most successful consumer health products in American history. It is worth noting that Dixon's wife, Josephine, and the particular domestic pain point she represented, the woman alone in the kitchen who has nicked her finger and needs to tend the injury without interrupting the work, was both the origin of the Band-Aid and the invisible labour that made its development necessary. The product she needed was designed by the man who noticed she needed it, and her contribution to its origin disappeared into the story of his invention, which is a small but precise illustration of how the domestic intelligence of women entered the commercial and medical record of the era. The vitamins deserve their own particular attention, because the vitamin story in the American medicine cabinet is a story of genuine science arriving in a commercial environment that was not always willing to wait for the science to finish. Casimir Funk coined the term vitamin, later shortened to vitamin, in 1912, derived from vital amine, based on his theory that certain compounds essential to life were amines, a theory that turned out to be only partially correct, but which gave the category its name and its initial framing of absolute nutritional necessity. The identification of the major vitamins through the 1920s and 30s, vitamin A, the B vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin D, was a genuine scientific achievement that explained why certain nutritional deficiencies caused specific diseases, why sailors got scurvy and children got rickets and certain populations developed beriberi, and the commercial translation of this achievement into the vitamin supplements of the 1940s and 50s was not illegitimate. Deficiencies were real. Supplementation could address them. The question that the advertising did not engage with, because the advertising was not built for questions of that kind, was whether supplementation improved health in people who were not deficient, and the answer to that question turned out to be much more complicated than the bright orange vitamin bottle suggested. One-a-day vitamins were introduced by Miles Laboratories in 1940, a multivitamin formulated on the emerging science of required daily nutrients and marketed with a simplicity that was also its strongest commercial feature. One tablet, one day, the minimum required attention to the nutritional foundation of health. The women who put the one-a-day bottle on the medicine cabinet shelf in 1953 were doing something that felt responsible, and that was, in the absence of a significant deficiency, modestly useful at best and largely neutral at worst, which is a different thing from the confident health maintenance the label described. But the cabinet held the bottle the way it held everything else, with the same democratic organisation, the same implicit endorsement of usefulness, and the vitamins stood in their row, alongside the aspirin and the cold cream and the Vicks, without any marking of relative efficacy, all carrying the same label authority, all standing in the same glass-shelved world behind the chrome-framed door. This is the thing about the medicine cabinet as an institution. It organised everything by proximity rather than by hierarchy. The mercurochrome and the aspirin and the vitamins and the paregoric and the Pond's cold cream existed in the same space, under the same chrome frame, subject to the same logic of availability and readiness, without any signal about which was more proven, which was more necessary, which was more complex in its implications than its label suggested. The cabinet was democratic in its organisation, which was both its greatest domestic virtue and its occasional vulnerability. Everything on the shelf was there because someone had decided it should be there, and the decision had been made according to the best available information and the most reliable sources, and the products had been purchased from trusted stores and applied with genuine care, and the household had been maintained in the way the household was supposed to be maintained, and the chrome-framed door had swung shut on the whole arrangement with the small, satisfying click that said, "Ready, prepared, managed." The click was real, the readiness was real, the care was real. The complexity that lay beneath it was real as well. and the distance between the two was the territory that the official image had agreed, without quite saying so, not to discuss. You smell the drugstore before you see it, and by the smell you mean the specific layering of things that a 1950s drugstore carries, the way an old church carries the smell of candles and wood and something older underneath. The Rexall on Main Street, the one where you have worked for 2.5 years, smells of floor wax and the particular chemical sweetness of the soda fountain syrups, of the powdery talcum that drifts from the opened face powder compacts on the cosmetics counter, of the camphor and menthol of the liniment shelf near the pharmacy counter, and of the coffee that the pharmacist, Mr. Hendricks, makes at 8:45 every morning in the small back room, and drinks from a dented aluminum cup that has been in the store since before you were hired. The smell changes through the day. By noon it has accumulated the lunch smells of the soda fountain, grilled cheese and cherry phosphate, and the warm, faintly metallic smell of the ice cream dipper sitting in its water glass. By evening it has settled into something denser, more pharmaceutical, the stored air of a room that has been managing human needs since 8 in the morning. You know all the versions of this smell. It is as familiar to you as your own kitchen, which is not an accident, because in many ways this is your other kitchen, the place where you perform the other half of your domestic intelligence, the part that does not involve your actual house. You arrive at 8:30, 10 minutes before the store opens, which is 10 minutes before you're required to arrive, but which your predecessor in the counter position told you, on your first day, was the only sensible practice because the woman who arrives at 8:30 has time to be herself before the customers arrive, and the woman who arrives at 8:45 is immediately reactive, on the back foot, managing rather than anticipating. You took this advice and have not questioned it, because in 2.5 years it has proven correct in the specific way that practical wisdom tends to prove correct, by making the hard days slightly less hard and the ordinary days something like smooth. The counter is yours from the moment you step behind it. Not legally, not in the organisational sense that Mr. Hendricks uses the word ownership, but in the way that any skilled person has ownership of their workspace, the way a cook owns the stove even when someone else's name is on the kitchen. You know where everything is, you know what is running low, you know which products move quickly, and which have been sitting since October, and which are about to be featured in the new Rexall circular that came in yesterday, and which you have already read, cover to cover, noting the items and prices and promotions the way an athlete reads a playbook, not casually, but with the specific attention that comes from knowing that the circular translates into questions, and the questions will come from women who have read the same circular at home over breakfast, and when the questions come, you will have answers. You straighten the lipstick display first, because the lipsticks are always in the state that the lipstick display enters by the end of the previous business day, which is to say somewhat disordered, the caps not quite aligned, a few of the testers turned sideways, the colours in the wrong order. You have a mental map of the display that's complete and exacting, rose nude at the left end of the first row, followed by the pinks in ascending depth, followed by the reds, followed by the deeper berry tones, followed by the corals at the right end, and the second row mirrors the first with the deeper shades, and any deviation from this order bothers you in a way you cannot entirely explain but which you have stopped trying to explain, because it is efficient, and efficiency is its own justification. You restore the order in 3 minutes, working quickly and precisely, tapping each tube lightly as you return it to its position. The face powder display comes next. You check the testers, removing the ones that have been pressed into confusion by the morning customers of the previous day, replacing them with fresh rounds from the box behind the counter, and lining the counter samples so their labels face forward and their lids are sealed, except for the one you leave slightly open near the centre. The medium beige that is the most commonly requested shade, the one that the most women will reach for first, because the testing ritual depends on the powder being reachable without asking, and women who can test without asking are women who buy. This is something you know not from a manual but from observation, from 2.5 years of watching how the cosmetics counter works and does not work, how the products that invite handling sell, and the products that require asking do not, and how the physical organisation of the counter is itself a kind of language that the customer reads in the few seconds before she decides whether to stop or to continue walking. The cold cream shelf is behind you, and you do not need to check it because you checked it yesterday afternoon before closing and it was fully stocked. The Pond's is there, 2 rows deep, the Noxzema beside it in its distinctive royal blue jar with the white lid, the Elizabeth Arden 8-hour cream in its distinctive position to the right of the Pond's, because women who are shopping for Pond's will see the 8-hour cream from the same eye line and the ones who are feeling slightly expanded today, slightly above the ordinary errand, will pick it up and look at it, and the ones who put it back down are not the customers you are thinking about, and the ones who do not are. This is not cynicism. This is the counter. This is how it works. The first customer of the day is a woman you know by face, if not by name, a woman who comes in roughly once a month with a list that she reads from a folded piece of paper she keeps in her purse. She's in her mid-40s probably, and she dresses in the way of a woman who takes dressing seriously without making a production of it. Good fabric, clean hem, shoes that have been recently polished. She orders her refill of the Jergens and the tube of Ipana and the bottle of Bayer, and then she stands for a moment looking at the lipstick display with the expression of a woman assessing a question she has already mostly answered. You wait. This is also something you have learned. The patience of the counter, the knowledge that the silence is not yours to fill. She picks up the rose nude, turns it to the light, clicks the base, and draws the colour up slightly. She examines it. She puts it back. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. You say quietly that the coral at the end is new this week, just came in with the Rexall order. If she is interested, she is welcome to look. She glances toward the end of the row and picks up the coral and opens it, and looks at it in the small mirror you keep, tilted toward the customer on the counter. She touches it to the back of her hand. She thinks. She puts it down. She picks up a pink slightly deeper than the one she usually buys. She tilts it in the light. She buys it. You ring it up with the Jergens and the Ipana and the Bayer, and she folds her list and puts it back in her purse, and she goes, and you straighten the lipstick display again, in the 3 places she moved it, and the morning proceeds. By 10 o'clock you have had 5 customers at the counter, and 1 consultation that crossed from the cosmetics into the pharmacy territory, a woman asking about the witch hazel and whether there was a difference between the regular witch hazel and the Dickinson's, and you told her, honestly and with some specificity, that the Dickinson's is a more refined preparation and is somewhat gentler on the skin, and that for a woman who uses it as a toner daily the difference matters, and for a woman who uses it occasionally for spot treatments it does not matter as much. And the woman thanked you in the way that women thank you when they have received actual information rather than a sales pitch, which is to say genuinely, and she bought the Dickinson's. The difference between information and a sales pitch is the line that the counter requires you to walk, and it is not always a clear line, but it has a feel. You know the feel of it the way you know the feel of the Pond's cream between your fingers, the way any practiced person knows the feel of the right thing as distinct from the wrong thing. When a woman asks about the hand lotion, you do not tell her all of them are good. You ask her about her hands, whether they are dry in the cold or dry all year, whether she has sensitive skin or tends toward oiliness, whether she wants a fragrance or would rather not, and then you tell her what will actually work for the situation she has described. Sometimes the answer is the Jergens, sometimes it is the Vaseline Intensive Care, which is newer and the company is advertising heavily. Sometimes it is the Cornhuskers lotion, which is the driest, most efficient hand lotion on the shelf, and is not glamorous and is not heavily advertised, and is exactly correct for a woman who works with her hands in cold water and needs something that will hold through the morning. You sell her the Cornhuskers. She comes back for it. The pharmacy counter is Mr. Hendricks's territory, and you respect the border between the cosmetics and the pharmacy the way you respect most organisational boundaries. When they serve the customer, you observe them, and when they do not, you navigate them carefully. The prescription orders are entirely his. The consultations about specific medications are his. But the general health products, the aspirin and the milk of magnesia, and the Pepto-Bismol and the vitamins and the Vicks and the rubbing alcohol and the adhesive bandages, those exist in a middle ground. And in the middle ground you have developed, over 2.5 years, a working knowledge that Mr. Hendricks has acknowledged once, by nodding at you when a customer came back to thank him for the recommendation that was actually yours, and he said yes, miss, with something like respect, and went back to the prescription he was filling. By lunchtime, the soda fountain at the back is producing the sounds and smells of its midday business, the short order cook calling and the counter person responding, and the stools occupied in the comfortable way of the regular lunch crowd, the same faces in roughly the same seats, the same orders being given with the slight variations of mood and weather and what happened this morning. You eat your lunch in the back room when Mr. Hendrick's prescription volume allows, which today it does, and you eat what you brought from home, a sandwich and an apple, and a small container of pudding that was left over from last night's dessert, and you read the second half of the Rexall circular, the half you did not get to this morning, the section on the personal hygiene products that will be featured next week. The afternoon brings a different quality of customer than the morning. The morning customers are errand customers, lists in hand, specific and efficient. The afternoon customers, the ones who come in between 1 and 4, are often moving more slowly, more provisionally. The way an afternoon moves more slowly than a morning in general, and they are more likely to browse, more likely to stand in front of the cold cream shelf for 2 full minutes, deciding between the Ponds and the Noxzema as though the decision has philosophical dimensions, and it does, a little. You do not hurry them. You're available, which is different from hovering, and when they look up with the expression that means I have a question, you are already turning toward them. An older woman comes in at 2:30 and asks you quietly about the feminine hygiene products, which are kept behind the counter and below the display level, which means she has to ask for them, which means the asking itself is the first obstacle she must clear, and she clears it with some difficulty, with a certain effort of matter-of-factness that is itself a kind of dignity. You retrieve what she asks for without making the retrieval into a performance, without staging the casualness that is more obvious than no performance at all. You hand it to her and say the price and put it in a bag and say thank you and move on, because this is what the counter requires in certain moments. Not warmth, not extra attention, just the clean efficiency of someone who does not see the transaction as anything other than what it is. A woman needing something and getting it, without cost in any form beyond the price. The late afternoon is cosmetics and vitamins and the restocking of whatever has been depleted through the day. You take count of the aspirin, the most reliable depletion, and note on the order sheet that Bayer needs replenishment, 3 dozen boxes, because the week before a holiday, the week when the cold front that has been sitting over the regional weather reports for a week finally arrives and brings with it the collective immune vulnerability of an entire neighbourhood, is never a good week to run short of aspirin. You note the Vicks, the adhesive bandages, the hydrogen peroxide. You note that the vitamin section is down to its last 3 bottles of the standard Maltor, which is the vitamin that moves fastest because it is the vitamin that the most people have been told by the most doctors to take, and have therefore incorporated into the daily routine, with the same uncomplicated regularity they bring to brushing their teeth. By closing time, the counter has a particular worn quality, the quality of a surface that has been useful all day, that carries the traces of its usefulness in the small disorder of moved bottles and shifted testers and the faint ring on the glass counter where a cup was set down briefly near the cold cream display. You restore it in the 15 minutes before Mr. Hendricks locks the front door. You straighten the lipsticks, you align the face powder, you check the inventory sheet, you wipe down the glass counter with the chamois cloth you keep under the counter, and which is your chamois cloth in the sense that you chose it, you maintain it, you replace it when it needs replacing. You cover the soda fountain testers with the small cloth covers. You check the lock on the register, not because you do not trust anyone, but because checking it is part of the closing, and the closing is part of the day, and you finish the day you began. Mr. Hendricks locks the front door. The Rexall sign in the window goes dark. The street outside is the mid-evening street of a small American town in 1953. Cold now and thinning of traffic. The storefronts on either side of the drugstore already dark or closing, the diner across the street doing its dinner business in the warm amber light of its plate glass window. You put on your coat and pick up your purse and nod to Mr. Hendricks, who nods back, and you step through the back door into the alley and then out onto the side street and into the evening. Tomorrow you will arrive at 8:30 again. The smell of the drugstore will be there, the floor wax and the syrups and the camphor and the coffee from the back room, and the counter will be in the state that the close left it, clean and organised and waiting, and you will step behind it and begin again. There is a particular satisfaction in this, not the satisfaction of great achievement or significant change, but the satisfaction of competence, of a specific skill practiced well in a specific space, of knowing exactly what the day requires and meeting that requirement with a precision that does not announce itself. The counter does not care whether you feel satisfied, but you do, quietly, at the end of the day, and that is enough. The women who worked behind the cosmetics and health product counters of American drugstores in the 1940s and 50s were doing a particular kind of work that the decade did not have a name for. They were health advisors and beauty consultants and product specialists and inventory managers and customer service representatives and quiet diplomats, all at the same time, in the same body at the same counter, for wages that reflected none of these things accurately. They were the interface between the household and the drugstore, between the need and the product, between the woman standing on one side of the glass counter with her list and her limited time and her specific situation and the wall of products behind it. They got it right more often than the record shows, because the record they left behind was not a record of expertise but of employment. Hours worked and wages earned and positions held. The administrative skeleton of a working life that had muscle and nerve the ledger did not capture. The counter knew. The women who worked it knew. And the women who came to it, week after week, year after year, for the Jurgens and the Bear and the Ponds, knew as well, in the way you know something useful when you have relied on it long enough. The last light in the Rexall goes off. The counter waits in the dark for morning. By 11 o'clock, the soda fountain has its mid-morning complement of customers, mostly women who have finished their shopping and are taking a break before the next errand, and the sound of the fountain, the hiss of the carbonation, and the clink of the long-handled spoons against the tall glasses fills the back of the store and drifts forward to the cosmetics counter in a way that has become as much a part of the counter's ambient background as the muzak that plays from the small speaker near the prescription section. The muzak is a mix of light orchestral arrangements that have been stripped of any particular personality, which is the point of muzak, or so you have always understood it. Music that is present without requiring attention, a sonic furniture that fills the room the way furniture fills a room, making the absence of emptiness but not constituting a feature. You have stopped hearing it the way you have stopped hearing the furnace in your own house. It is there. It does not require anything from you. The vitamins are restocked on Thursdays, which means that by Tuesday the front row of the vitamin display is sometimes a row of single bottles, rather than the full orderly array that the Thursday restock produces. You manage this by pulling the remaining bottles forward so that the gaps in the back are invisible from the customer side of the counter. This is a small display skill, the skill of managing a depleted inventory so that it does not look depleted, and it belongs to a larger category of counter skills that are about the management of appearance in the service of commerce. The cosmetics counter is an environment where appearance is both the subject and the method, where the product you are selling is the improvement of appearance, and the method of selling it is an environment whose appearance has been carefully managed to suggest abundance, quality, and the kind of casual, effortless arrangement that requires considerable effort to produce. You are expert in this management. You do not experience it as deception, you experience it as craft. A young woman comes in around 11:30, clearly new to the counter, possibly recently out of school, with the particular look of someone who has decided to do something they are slightly nervous about. She stands slightly to one side of the direct approach to the cosmetics counter, examining the nail polish display with the concentrated attention of someone who is thinking about something other than nail polish. You wait. When she glances up and catches your eye, you offer the small, entirely unstaged smile that says you're here and there is no urgency, and whenever she's ready. She comes to the counter. She wants to know about foundation, she says. She has never bought foundation before. She's been using the face powder that her mother uses, but she has a friend who says the powder looks better over foundation, and she wants to know if that is true, and if so, which one to buy. This is the kind of question that requires real information and not a sales approach, because the real information will serve both her and the counter better over time than a quick sale. You ask her several questions about her skin, the type, the tone, whether she tends toward oiliness or dryness, whether she has any skin sensitivity. You ask about her complexion, not in the language of magazines, but in the practical language of colour matching, what undertone her skin carries, warm or cool, and you hold up 2 testers on the back of your own hand so she can see the difference. She looks carefully. She has the attentiveness of someone who is genuinely learning something. You take one of the lighter foundations on a small cosmetic sponge and test it on the inside of her wrist, which is one of the places where the skin colour is truest and the match will be most accurate. The foundation is from Revlon, the Ultima 2 line, and it is the correct match for her complexion, which has a warmth to it that the cooler shade would have turned slightly grey and the warmer shade would have made too orange, and the one you have selected falls in between with a satisfying accuracy. You show her in the hand mirror. She looks at her wrist and then at her face in the mirror and makes the comparison that her mind is already making automatically. She nods. She wants it. You tell her the price and then, because she mentioned the powder over foundation question, you tell her yes. The foundation gives the powder something to hold to, something to even the surface, and the result is more uniform than powder alone on most skin types. But that the foundation itself needs to be set with a light application of powder, and that she should use the blotting paper, which is in the small flat packet at the end of the display, before the powder so that the oil on her skin does not interfere with how the powder lays. She listens to all of this with the same careful attention she brought to the foundation test. She buys the foundation and the blotting papers and the face powder in the matching shade that you recommend, and thanks you in a way that contains some surprise, as though she had not expected to come away with more than she came in wanting, and has found that she received more than she expected in a form she had not anticipated, which was the form of actual information from an actual person who knew what she was talking about. This is the aspect of the counter that does not appear in the job description, which is simply sales. The job description does not include educator, though you are one, and it does not include consultant, though you are one of those as well, and it does not include the specific kind of relationship manager that the regular customers represent, the women who come in every month with their lists and who, you know well enough to remember the lipstick shade they prefer and the face powder they are loyal to, and the fact that Mrs. Whittaker cannot use anything with lanolin in it, because it makes her face itch, and the fact that Mrs. Kowalski's daughter is getting married in April, and Mrs. Kowalski has been quietly preparing for several months, accumulating the cosmetic supplies for the event with the same careful advanced planning she brings to everything in her household. Mrs. Kowalski is in at noon, coming in on her lunch break from the insurance office where she works 3 days a week, and she's further along in her April preparations than you might have expected, having already settled on the lipstick and the face powder, and now working through the eyebrow pencil question, which is a question that requires some delicacy because Mrs. Kowalski's eyebrows are a particular shape, and she has been filling them in for years with a technique that was correct for a previous decade, and that is beginning to look slightly archaic in the way that all techniques calibrated to a specific moment look when the moment has moved on. You handle this with the diplomatic precision that the counter requires, acknowledging what she's been doing before suggesting the slightly different pencil and the slightly different application method that would serve her better, framing it as a product recommendation rather than a technique correction, which it is also because the line between the two is something you navigate daily. She takes the new pencil and the explanation of the application method and tries it herself on the back of her hand, first with the old pressure and then with the lighter touch you describe, and she sees the difference and says, without self-consciousness, that she has been doing it wrong all this time. You say not wrong, just slightly heavy, and that the current eyebrow preference is for a slightly less defined line that gives a softer look to the whole face, which is true, and she seems satisfied with this framing, and she buys the pencil and the small sharpener that goes with it, and makes a joke about what her husband will say when she comes home looking like a different woman, and you laugh with her genuinely, because the joke is warm and self-aware, and because Mrs. Kowalski is one of the people for whom the counter is a genuine pleasure. The pleasure is real, on certain days and with certain customers, and it is one of the things about this work that the job description also fails to capture. The cosmetics counter, when it is working correctly, is a place of genuine assistance, a place where knowledge about a specific category of self-maintenance is available without a prescription, without an appointment, without any of the gatekeeping that accompanies medical advice, and available specifically to women who are managing the appearance of their faces and bodies under the combined pressure of commercial advertising and social expectation, and their own desire to look a certain way, which is to say, with intention. A woman who comes to the counter with a question about which cold cream to use for her particular skin type, or which lipstick shade will work with her colouring, or whether the Witch Hazel or the Dickinson's is the better toner, is a woman who has decided to take some aspect of her own maintenance seriously, and the counter's job is to help her do that well. When the counter does that job, it is satisfying. It is the satisfaction of a craft that meets a real need. The afternoon brings the school children on their way home, stopping in for the comic books that are racked near the front door, and for the penny candy counter that sits adjacent to the comics, and occasionally for the aspirin or the cough drops that have been added to the errand by a parent who called the school earlier. The children are not the cosmetics counter's customers, but they are part of the store's ecology, and their presence in the afternoon creates a particular energy that you have come to think of as useful, because the cosmetics counter adjacent to the general drugstore traffic of after-school children is a cosmetics counter that remains visible to the mothers who accompany the younger children, and mothers of young children are frequently the women who know what they need but have not had the hour required to come in and get it. They stop briefly for the lipstick refill or the cold cream or the Jergens, the errand that has been waiting for an occasion and has now found one, and the transaction is quick and the counter moves forward. By 3 o'clock, the afternoon light has shifted the store into its late-day mode, the shadows lengthening on the floor through the plate glass window, the traffic outside picking up with the end of the business day. The soda fountain begins its after-school rush, the counter stools occupied by teenagers in the way that teenagers occupy stools, with a particular studied casualness that is its own kind of studied formality, and the chocolate malts and the cherry cokes flow with the regularity of a system that has been doing this for 3 decades and knows the rhythm. You watch the fountain from the cosmetics counter, with the peripheral observation that has become your second nature in this store, tracking the movement of the afternoon without being drawn out of your own work. At 4:15, an older man comes in for his wife, which is its own specific genre of errand. He stands at the edge of the counter with a small piece of paper in his hand that he has been given by his wife, and which contains a list that he has not entirely decoded. He shows you the paper. It says Pond's and the blue one and the regular, not the dry skin. You tell him the Pond's is the cold cream, and the blue one is almost certainly the Noxema, and the regular, not the dry skin, means the regular Jergens rather than the Jergens dry skin formula. He looks at you with an expression that is equal parts gratitude and mild humiliation, and you hand him the 3 items and ring them up and put them in a bag, and he thanks you and goes, and you file this transaction away in the running account of the counter's small satisfactions. The errand successfully decoded, the husband returned to his wife with the correct things, the system having worked as the system is supposed to work. The pharmacist's advice flows through the store in a different register than the counter's advice, more official, more guarded by professional responsibility and the particular weight of the prescription pad. But the 2 registers serve the same population, and the border between them is not always clear, and you navigate the border the way you navigate everything in this store, with the accumulated knowledge of 2.5 years of standing behind a counter in a space where health and commerce and daily life meet, and have a conversation that is practical and personal and occasionally urgent. You are not a pharmacist, you would not claim to be. But you are something the pharmacist is not, which is the person standing between the customer and the health product shelf, the person who takes the question and returns an answer, the person who notices when a customer's question is really a different question, and who finds a way to address the one underneath. The closing routine ends the day the way the opening began it, with attention to the specific, the tending of a specific space that requires specific tending. You wipe the counter, you cap the testers, you restore the display to its Thursday morning condition, which is the standard you hold the display to regardless of what day it is, because Thursday morning is when the week's order arrives and the display is at its fullest and most organised. And maintaining that standard through the week is the discipline of the counter, the maintenance of abundance in the face of depletion, the professional pretense that the shelf is always stocked and the product is always available, and the customer who comes in at 4:45 on a Friday will be served with the same fullness as the customer who came in at 8:45 on a Thursday. You almost always maintain this standard. The days when the aspirin runs out before the new order arrives are the days you note in your small mental record of what did not go right, and they are few. You step out into the early evening street and the cold air meets you with the specific indifference of October, and the lights of the main street stores are on against the darkening sky, and the smell of the drugstore follows you for half a block, the floor wax and the syrups and the camphor, carrying in your coat fabric the record of the day's work, and then the cold air takes it, and you are just a woman on a sidewalk going home, which is what you are, among the other things you are, and the counter will be there in the morning, and the morning will be there, and you will arrive at 8:30. The official image of the medicine cabinet in 1953 was an image of order, abundance, and benevolent science. It appeared in the advertisements as a gleaming interior, perfectly organised, every product labelled with the reassuring authority of a company that knew what it was doing, every item positioned as the answer to a specific, manageable, temporary problem. The woman in the advertisement who opened the medicine cabinet was confident and calm. She reached for the bromo seltzer with the assurance of a woman who understood exactly what was wrong with her and exactly what would fix it. She was dressed, usually in a way that was presentable without being formal, the domestic version of competence, and her medicine cabinet, like her kitchen and her laundry and her children, was a testament to a system that worked, that had been thought about and provided for, that required no anxiety because everything was in place. The actual medicine cabinet of 1953 was not entirely different from this image, but the gap between the image and the reality was, as it always is in matters of domestic life, instructive. The products were real, the care they represented was real, the competence of the women who organised and maintained those shelves was real, but there were things the advertisements did not mention, things the Rexall circular did not include in its confident typography, things that would only become clear later, some much later, when the science had caught up with the practice, and the practice had to be reconsidered in the light of what the science found. Start with the thing that was on virtually every medicine cabinet shelf in the country, and that has been mentioned already, the aspirin. Aspirin in the 1950s was so thoroughly established, so foundational to the domestic pharmacopoeia, that questioning it would have seemed not merely eccentric but vaguely ungrateful, as though you were proposing to question hot running water. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. The Bayer tin and its equivalents were opened and closed daily in households across the country, and the tablets were given to children and adults alike with a confidence that was based on decades of safe use and no particular reason to suspect anything more. The connection between aspirin and Ray's syndrome in children, a rare but serious condition involving liver and brain inflammation that could be triggered by viral illness combined with aspirin use, would not be formally established until the 1980s, and the recommendation against giving aspirin to children with viral illnesses would take the remainder of that decade to work its way into standard medical advice. In 1953, the aspirin tin in the bathroom cabinet was given to children with fevers without hesitation, because there was no hesitation that the available science required. This is important. The people who gave their children aspirin were not negligent. They were following the best advice they had from the best sources available to them. The advice was incomplete. The sources were not wrong exactly, but they were not yet complete. The mercurochrome, that vivid orange-red liquid that announced itself on scraped knees and cut fingers with such visible authority, contained a compound called mebromin, which includes mercury in its chemical structure. In the 1950s, the connection between mercury compounds and neurological harm was not absent from scientific literature, but it was abstract enough, contested enough, and the exposures from products like mercurochrome were small enough that regulatory action was not taken until significantly later. The Food and Drug Administration eventually classified mebromin as a compound for which safety had not been established, and mercurochrome was withdrawn from the American market in 1998. For the children who had their knees and fingers painted orange through the 40s, 50s and 60s, the retrospective understanding is uncomfortable in that specific way. That retrospective understanding of household safety often is the knowledge that the care expressed through a product was genuine, and the product itself was less reliable than the care deserved. The calomel that appeared in some households as a teething powder for infants, standard practice well into the mid-20th century in many parts of the country, contained mercury chloride, and its use contributed to a condition called acrodynia, or pink disease, which caused pain, skin changes, and in some cases more serious harm in the infants who received it. Calomel teething powders were sold openly, recommended by some doctors, trusted by mothers who were following the same inherited domestic logic that had governed the medicine cabinet for generations. If it is on the shelf of the drugstore, if the label describes its purpose and its recommended dose, if the pharmacist dispenses it without concern, then it is the thing that can be trusted. The logic was sound, the trust was sincere, the products in certain cases were not worthy of it. The mum deodorant that appeared on many bathroom shelves in this era contained aluminum compounds that were effective at reducing perspiration, and this was presented in advertising as a technical accomplishment, the science of personal hygiene solving the problem of perspiration with clean chemical efficiency. The relationship between aluminum compounds in deodorants and antiperspirants and breast cancer or Alzheimer's disease has been studied and debated through the subsequent decades, with the scientific consensus generally failing to establish a clear causal link, but with enough residual uncertainty to keep the conversation alive. The point for 1953 is not the conclusion but the premise. The products in the medicine cabinet that contained chemicals were not required to demonstrate their long-term safety in a rigorous way before they reached the shelf, because the regulatory infrastructure for that requirement was still being built, and the science required to make that demand was still being developed. And meanwhile, the products sat on the shelves and were used with confidence because confidence was what the labels invited and the invitations were accepted. The patent medicines had not entirely disappeared from the medicine cabinet even by 1953. They had changed their form. The most obvious survivors were the proprietary remedies that occupied the boundary between pharmacy and folk medicine. The things that you bought without a prescription but which presented themselves in the idiom of medicine, rather than the idiom of a general store tonic. Bromo seltzer, a combination of bromide and aspirin and sodium bicarbonate and citric acid dissolved in a fizzing glass of water, was used for headaches and hangovers and a general range of what was called nervousness, and the bromide in its formula was a sedative compound that was at the time considered safe in small doses and is now understood to be capable of causing, with regular use, a cluster of symptoms including confusion, irritability, and skin eruptions collectively called brumism. It was used regularly by people who relied on it for their regular headaches and the nervousness that the 1950s produced in quantities sufficient to keep bromo seltzer in considerable demand. The paregoric in its brown glass bottle, the tincture of opium that appeared on the bottom shelf of the careful 1950s medicine cabinet, is perhaps the clearest example of the gap between the official image and the hidden reality, because it requires us to hold two true things simultaneously. The first is that paregoric was a genuine medicine that genuinely helped with a genuine problem, the cramping and distress of gastrointestinal illness, and that the mothers who used it were doing so in good faith, with the endorsement of doctors and pharmacists and the accumulated domestic wisdom of several generations. The second is that it contained denatured opium, that it was addictive with regular use, and that its availability over the counter without any requirement for a prescription meant that its use was governed entirely by the judgment and restraint of whoever was using it, which was a governing mechanism that the compound's pharmacological properties did not always support. Paregoric became a Schedule III controlled substance in the United States in 1970, which is a date that, from the perspective of 1953, lies so far in the future as to be meaningless. In 1953, it sat on the bottom shelf of the medicine cabinet as an unremarkable part of the household inventory, next to the gauze and the hydrogen peroxide and the butterfly bandages, and it was passed from mother to daughter as a household staple, and the brown glass bottle with its familiar label was as ordinary and as trusted as the Bayer tin and the vapor rub jar. The women who kept it were not negligent. They were trusting a system that was, in this particular instance, extending more trust in return than the available science warranted. The cold cream, the Pond's and the Noxzema, and the Elizabeth Arden variants that occupied the top shelf of the medicine cabinet and the top of the cosmetics counter, was a product with a history that stretches back to a physician in ancient Greece named Galen, who is credited with an early formulation of a water and oil emulsion used to soften and protect the skin. The mid-20th century version was not Galen's cream exactly, but it was operating on the same basic principle, oil and water emulsified into a white dense cream that could be applied to the face, massaged gently and removed with a cloth, taking the day's accumulation with it. Cold cream worked. There was no hidden scandal in the cold cream, but the way it was sold, the way it was positioned in advertising as the foundation of a woman's visible worth, the implicit and sometimes explicit claim that the maintenance of the face was a woman's primary obligation to herself and to her household and to the social world she moved in, was an environment in which a product that worked was embedded in a set of expectations that worked for some women and were costly for others. The advertising of beauty products in the 1940s and 50s operated on an anxiety platform, which is the platform that advertising has always found most efficient. Identify a deficiency, define it as a problem, offer the product as the solution. The deficiency in beauty advertising was always the woman's face and body, always, without exception, presented as a work in progress, a thing that required management, vigilance, and the consistent application of the correct products without which it would deteriorate, age, soften, lose its value to the eyes of the world and specifically to the eyes of men, which the advertising consistently and explicitly specified as the relevant audience. This was not unique to the 1950s, it was the water the whole century was swimming in. But the medicine cabinet that was organised partly under the influence of this advertising, that held its cold cream and its Jergens and its lipstick tester, and it's tangy natural, not just because they served the woman who used them, but because the advertising had convinced her that failing to use them was a failure of a more personal kind, was a medicine cabinet organised partly under a pressure that the chrome frame and the glass shelves and the organised rows did not openly display. The weight loss remedies that appeared in some medicine cabinets of the era, particularly through the 1950s, represent a category of product that the official image of the medicine cabinet was least likely to acknowledge. Dexatrim and similar products containing phenylpropanolamine, a compound used as a decongestant and appetite suppressant, were available without prescription and were used by women following the intersection of advertising, cultural pressure, and the post-war expansion of the diet industry that had decided, with considerable commercial efficiency, that a woman's relationship to her own body was a problem requiring a product solution. The phenylpropanolamine compounds were eventually linked to increased stroke risk and removed from the American market in 2000, which puts a considerable distance between the 1950s cabinet and the reckoning. But the products that filled the space before the safety question was resolved were filling a need that had been manufactured as much as discovered. The fluoride in the toothpaste is a different kind of story, because it is a story of a genuine public health advance that arrived with genuine controversy and that is now so thoroughly accepted as to seem almost boring. The first fluoridated water supply in the United States was established in Grand Rapids, Michigan in 1945, and Crest with fluoride, the first fluoride toothpaste to receive the endorsement of the American Dental Association, arrived in 1960, just at the edge of our period. In 1953, the Apana and the Colgate and the Pepsodent on the medicine cabinet shelf did not contain fluoride. The fluoride that would eventually be understood as the single most effective preventive dental health measure available to ordinary households had not yet arrived. The mothers who brushed their children's teeth twice a day with Apana were doing everything they knew to do, and their children's cavities were filled regularly by the family dentist, and the dental visits were accepted as a normal part of the household health management, as regular and as expected as the buy a refill, because no one had yet fully understood that the cavities themselves were preventable. The fluoride story is not a story of harm. It is a story of a benefit not yet arrived, which is the gentler version of the gap between the official image and the hidden reality, the absence rather than the presence of something that should have been there. The vitamins present their own particular complexity. The post-war vitamin industry was an industry before the science was entirely ready to support it, meaning that the vitamins were being sold, in their large standard multivitamin bottles and their individual therapeutic dose forms, in advance of a firm consensus about optimal dosing, about bioavailability, about the specific effects of vitamin supplementation in populations that were not deficient, about the difference between what a vitamin does in the presence of a deficiency and what it does or fails to do in the absence of one. The vitamins were not harmful. The aspirin was not harmful. The Pond's cold cream was not harmful. But the claims made for them, the certainty with which they were recommended and packaged and advertised, the confidence that was sold alongside the product, was sometimes in advance of the science that would eventually settle whether the confidence was fully warranted. This is the hardest thing to say about the medicine cabinet of 1953, because it requires distinguishing carefully between the people inside the system and the system itself. The women who stocked these cabinets were doing something genuinely good. The care they were expressing was real care. The products they chose were the best products available to them within the system they had access to. The drugstores that supplied those products were run mostly by people who believed in what they were selling. The pharmacists who answered questions and filled prescriptions were professionally educated and professionally committed. The system worked substantially. The medicine cabinet did what it was designed to do, which was to make the daily maintenance of the household's health possible and organised and manageable, and to provide resources for the moments when something went wrong that were better than what any previous generation had had access to. And still, the mercury in the mercurochrome was real, the opium in the paregoric was real, the bromine in the bromo-seltzer was real, the chemicals in the diet pills were real. The anxiety manufactured by the beauty advertising was real. The things that the gleaming chrome frame and the glass shelves and the organised rows did not display were as real as the things that they did, and understanding the medicine cabinet fully means understanding both, the genuine competence and the genuine gap, the real care and the real limits, the image that was offered and the reality that was lived, which was, as all lived realities are, more complicated, more human, and more interesting than the image it was built to reflect. The mirror closes, the reflection disappears. The morning, with all its ordinary urgencies, goes on. And here, in the quiet that follows, is where we find what tonight has really been about. We have spent these hours inside a world that was organised in so many ways around the specific domestic intelligence of women who were rarely credited for it, who managed households and health and daily life with a precision that no job title acknowledged and no paycheck reflected, and who did so with products and systems and inherited knowledge that were sometimes exactly right, and sometimes imperfectly right, and occasionally, as we have seen, in need of revision. But the revision does not diminish the competence, it clarifies the context. We stood this morning in a 1950s bathroom and felt the particular character of that hour. The cold floor and the east light and the medicine cabinet with its chrome and its glass and its organised rows, each bottle and tin and tube a small promise about what the day could be managed into, what the small emergencies could be absorbed by, what the daily maintenance of the household body looked like when it was done well. We watched a woman open the cabinet and perform the ritual of the morning not as vanity, and not as submission to expectation, but as the quiet, determined expression of a belief that the day was worth preparing for. That belief was real. That preparation was real. The Ponds and the Bayer and the Jergens and the Vicks were the physical form of a domestic intention that asked, quietly and consistently, for nothing more dramatic than that the people she cared for would be tended, and that the tending would be there when it was needed, and that the shelves would be stocked when the need arrived. We followed the men who built the drugstores that supplied those shelves, the Charles Walgreens and the Rexall operators, and the pharmacists who learned their trade in the old way and brought it forward into the new century's new chemistry. And we saw how a commercial system and a genuine public health need met each other in the particular space of the American drugstore, the soda fountain, and the prescription counter, and the cosmetics display, all serving in their different registers the same underlying need. A country that had learned to trust medicine was a country ready to be helped by it, and the drugstore was where help was dispensed, in the literal and the wider sense of that word. We stood behind the cosmetics counter of the Rexall and felt the particular competence of a woman who knows her counter the way a surgeon knows a theatre, who can find the Cornhusker's lotion without looking, and who knows when to speak and when to let the silence work on behalf of the customer's own decision, and who goes home at the end of a day of dispensing both products and the quiet, unacknowledged expertise that makes products into actual help. And we sat with the harder knowledge, the knowledge that not everything inside the chrome frame was what its label claimed, that the science had not arrived at the shelf as quickly as the product had, that the care expressed through certain objects was more reliable than the objects themselves. We held that knowledge without using it to diminish what came before it, because the women who opened these cabinets every morning were not fools. They were people doing the best they knew how to do with the information they had, in a system that was better than what preceded it, and not yet as good as what came after. This is the condition of every generation, and the definition of progress, which is never clean and never complete, but which, looked at honestly, is almost always happening. Somewhere in a house that smells of coffee and something baking, in a kitchen that is just now warming up, in a bathroom with east-facing windows and a frosted glass globe, and a chrome-framed cabinet on the wall, a woman is finishing her morning routine and closing the cabinet with the small, satisfying click of its latch, and the day is about to begin, and everything that is needed is in its place, and the morning with all its demands is ready to receive her. Let that thought carry you now. Let the sound of that latch, quiet and certain and completely ordinary, be the last sound the night requires. The cabinet is stocked, the shelves are full, the morning has been prepared for, and the day is in good hands, and the only thing left to do is rest. The hair dyes and colouring products that appeared in some medicine cabinets of the era, and more commonly in the vanity tables that many households maintained separately from the medicine cabinet proper, carry their own particular history of the gap between image and reality. Clairol's Miss Clairol, introduced in 1950 with the famous advertising question, "Does she or doesn't she? Only her hairdresser knows for sure," was the first commercially successful at-home hair colouring product designed to produce natural-looking results, and its introduction created an entirely new category of domestic practice and an entirely new category of domestic secret. The advertising campaign was brilliant precisely because it refused to answer its own question, which meant that the woman who used the product was invited into a fiction of ambiguity the possibility that her hair colour was natural, a possibility the advertising helped maintain through the wording of its own question, and the social permission this fiction extended was real. By 1953, the number of American women who coloured their hair had risen significantly, partly because the product itself had improved, and partly because the advertising had reduced the stigma that had previously attached to hair colouring as a practice associated with actresses and women of uncertain virtue. The advertising also did not mention that certain hair dye formulations of the era, including some early versions of Clairol products, contained paraphenylenediamine, a compound that is a known skin sensitizer and that can cause contact dermatitis in sensitive individuals, a fact that would eventually be incorporated into the warning labels, but that was not prominently featured in the early advertising, because prominent warnings were not the idiom of the era's cosmetics advertising, which preferred the idiom of confidence and transformation, and the cheerful suggestion that whatever the product changed about you would be a change entirely for the better. Tangy lipstick, perhaps the most peculiar item in the mid-century cosmetics inventory, was a lipstick that changed colour on the lips, appearing orange in the tube and translucent on the skin, shifting to a colour that was supposed to be your own natural lip colour enhanced rather than replaced, a technology that appealed to women who wanted the effect of lipstick without the obvious application of lipstick, the women for whom the painted mouth was still slightly too theatrical, slightly too conscious of itself as a performance. Tangy Natural was promoted specifically for teenagers and for women in conservative professional or social environments, and it occupied a position in the cosmetics hierarchy that was explicitly about the management of appearance management, the product for the woman who was doing what the advertising told her she needed to do, but in a way that allowed her to seem as though she had not done it. The logic of this product is the logic of the era's approach to feminine self-improvement in general. The work should be invisible, the result should look effortless, the effort itself should be concealed. The suntan products that appeared on medicine cabinet shelves through the 1950s carry a particular irony that becomes visible only in retrospect, which is that the entire category was operating on a scientific misunderstanding that would take decades to correct. The tan that Coppertone and other suntan preparations were designed to facilitate was not understood in the 1950s as skin damage. It was understood as health. The bronze skin that resulted from sun exposure was associated in the post-war decade with outdoor activity, with leisure and prosperity and the kind of vacation that a modern American could afford, with vitality and wholesomeness and the specific aesthetic of robust physical well-being. The suntan lotion on the medicine cabinet shelf was the lotion that helped you get there, that smoothed and moisturized the skin in the process of the solar exposure that was the point. The connection between UV radiation and melanoma, between repeated tanning and accelerated skin aging, between the suntan and the skin cancer that might arrive 40 years later, was not part of the conversation in 1953, because the science had not yet established it, and in the absence of the science, the culture made the only assessment it had the tools to make, which was aesthetic, and the aesthetic assessment was that the tan was good. The deodorant shelf of the medicine cabinet or the medicine cabinet adjacent space represented a particular mid-century anxiety about the body and its uncooperative tendencies, and the anxiety, as with the halitosis anxiety manufactured by Listerine's advertising, was both a real social concern and a commercially amplified one. Mum, the first commercial deodorant, was introduced in 1888, a cream in a small jar that contained zinc oxide as its active compound, and it established the category of product before the word deodorant was in common use. By the 1950s, the deodorant market had expanded into sticks, roll-ons, sprays, and antiperspirant formulations, and the advertising for these products operated on the same social anxiety architecture that the Listerine campaign had pioneered: the threat of social failure, the possibility of the unaware offence, the suggestion that the body, unmanaged and unchemically assisted, was a source of potential embarrassment that only the correct product could forestall. Ban Roll-On, introduced in 1955, used the ball applicator technology that had been developed for the ballpoint pen and applied it to deodorant, and the innovation was both practical and symbolic. Practical because the roll-on was cleaner and more convenient than the cream deodorant, and symbolic because the transfer of technology from writing instruments to personal hygiene products was itself a kind of statement about the relationship between the rational efficiency of the mid-century and the management of the body, the application of engineering intelligence to the problem of being human. The medicine cabinet responded to this innovation the way it responded to most innovations, by making room, by reorganizing the shelf slightly, by replacing the mum jar with the ban bottle, by adjusting the daily ritual to include the new form of the product without interrogating whether the product itself was more or less necessary than the advertising insisted it was. The rubbing alcohol is one of the simplest and most honest products in the cabinet's inventory, and its honesty is a virtue that stands in some contrast to the products with more complicated relationships to their own advertising. Isopropyl alcohol, 70% concentration, in a brown glass bottle, is what it says it is and does what it says it does, which is to disinfect surfaces, clean wounds, reduce fever through evaporative cooling when applied to the skin, and serve as a solvent for a variety of household cleaning applications that the cabinet has never officially claimed, but which every household knows it for. The rubbing alcohol does not have an advertising campaign that manufactures anxiety about the consequences of not using it. It does not have a social fear platform. It does not have an aspirational image built around a glamorous product endorser. It has a brown bottle and a straightforward label, and a persistent usefulness that has kept it on the shelf since before any of the other products in the cabinet were invented. If you like the video so far, please leave us a like and a sub. A sub to the channel helps us make more videos for you to watch and keep the channel alive. The castor oil, which you will find in some households of the era still occupying the bottom shelf or the undersink cabinet, is an older remedy than almost everything else in the cabinet, older than the drugstore that sold it, older than the concept of brand name medicine, a vegetable oil derived from the castor bean that has been used as a laxative and purgative for several thousand years. By the 1950s, it was already beginning to seem archaic, the sort of thing that grandmothers kept, and that the modern medicine cabinet with its Phillips milk of magnesia and its Correctal tablets was in the process of replacing. But in households that had not yet made the transition, or in households where the grandmother was still a practical presence in the domestic medicine tradition, the castor oil remained, in its distinctive bottle with its slightly viscous, amber-coloured contents, carrying its ancient association with the productive discomfort of thorough purging and the particular maternal conviction that the child's digestive system required periodic aggressive management. The taste of castor oil, which is among the most persistently remembered sensory experiences of mid-century American childhood, is dense and slightly rancid, and clings to the memory with the stubbornness that only truly unpleasant tastes possess. The eye drops, whether Vicine, introduced in 1958 and thus at the very edge of our period, or the earlier Murine or the teardrop bottles of boric acid solution that some households still kept, represent the cabinet's response to the specific problem of the eyes in an era of considerable ambient irritation, coal smoke and wood smoke and the cigarette smoke that was ubiquitous in homes and offices and public spaces in the 1950s, the smoke that made eyes red and rough, and that was producing in the aggregate a contribution to respiratory and ocular health costs that the decade was not yet accounting for. The eye drops were the symptomatic treatment for a cause that was not being addressed, because the cause, which was cigarette smoke and industrial pollution, and the specific air quality of enclosed spaces full of people who smoked, was not yet framed as a cause. It was framed as the natural condition of the air, the baseline against which the eye drops were the appropriate individual response. The cigarettes themselves, it should be noted, were not in the medicine cabinet, but they were in the same households, in the same bathrooms often, on the same counters, and the relationship between the cigarettes and the contents of the medicine cabinet was a relationship the era was aware of and was actively choosing not to examine. The cigarette was not a medicine cabinet item, but it produced medicine cabinet items: the throat lozenges for the scratchy throat, the nasal spray for the congestion, the cough drops for the cough. The Luden's Wild Cherry cough drops in their yellow and red tins sat on the medicine cabinet shelf, alongside the more formally medicinal cough suppressants, occupying the ambiguous territory between candy and medicine that cough drops have always inhabited, and they were consumed in quantities sufficient to keep them in regular rotation on the shopping list, because the cough for which they were the remedy was the cough that was not going to stop as long as the cause was being drawn in with deliberate regularity. The fluoride toothpaste that the medicine cabinet of 1953 did not yet have, the supplement that the vitamins of the era could not yet quite specify in terms of individual need, the child's safety caps that the aspirin bottle did not yet require, the warning labels that the paregoric and the mercurochrome did not yet carry. These are the absences that the official image of the medicine cabinet does not show, because the official image is organised around what is present rather than what is not, around the full shelves and the organised rows and the chrome-framed door that swings shut on a world of adequate preparation. The absences were not the result of negligence. They were the result of knowledge not yet arrived, of a science still in the process of developing the tools to ask the questions that would produce the answers that would change what went on the shelf. The medicine cabinet of 1953 was a better medicine cabinet than the medicine cabinet of 1933, and the medicine cabinet of 1973 would be a better cabinet than the one in 1953. And the improvements were real and were significant, and the direction of the improvement was consistently toward greater safety, greater precision, greater accountability of the product to the claims it made, and the standards the regulatory environment had developed for judging those claims. The arc of that improvement runs through the century with the consistency of a genuine public health achievement, and the families who opened their medicine cabinets on the ordinary mornings of the 1950s were the beneficiaries of what had already been achieved, and the unknowing patients of what had not yet been identified as a problem. That is not a comfortable position to describe, but it is an honest one, and honesty, in the end, is what the mirror asks of you. The mirror that faced the medicine cabinet, the standard bathroom mirror of the mid-century household, above the white porcelain sink smudged at the upper corner where the backing is lifting, showing the face in the early morning light with the same impartiality it showed everything. This is the real surface of the medicine cabinet's story. Not the chrome frame and the glass shelves and the organised rows, though all of those are real. The mirror, the face in the mirror, with sleep still in it and the day not yet begun. The person who opens the cabinet and takes down the cold cream and begins the morning. Not because the advertisement told her to, not because the Rexall stocked the shelf, but because this is the morning and the morning requires tending, and she is the one who does the tending and she has done it before and she'll do it again. And somewhere in the repetition of that action, in the daily return to the cabinet and the daily performance of the small rituals of maintenance, there is something that is not captured by the chrome and the glass and the labels on the bottles, something that is about care itself, the daily practice of caring for the body and the household and the people inside it, the practice that the advertising tried to sell back to women at considerable profit by making them anxious about the consequences of not buying, but that existed before the advertising arrived and will exist after the products on the shelf have been replaced by different products with different formulations and different names and different warnings on their labels. The cabinet closes. The mirror shows a room. The room is quiet. The morning has begun. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. See you on the next one.